This mini lecture is on Christ's presence in communion. This comes under the topic of sacramentology, the chapter in Hansen for this week. In terms of the broader field of religious studies, we're talking about ritual, and the communion is a sacrament recognized by virtually all Christian denominations. It's also called the Eucharist, or the Great Thanksgiving, or the Lord's Supper. And there have been different understandings of how Christ might be present in Holy Communion. The traditional Catholic position has been around for a long time, but Hansen talks about competing positions that developed with the Protestant Reformation. So, what are some of these positions? Well, the traditional Catholic position is basically the doctrine of transubstantiation. And some of you may remember, hopefully this will jog your memory if you don't, that we talked very early in the semester about the philosophical and theological notion of substance, Latin term, as we were reading St. Thomas Aquinas, and he was relying on Aristotle and ancient Greek philosophy. Something substance, literally, is that which stands under, the permanent thing that gives it its nature, its essence, that makes it what it is throughout all the time that it exists. So transubstantiation means that the elements of communion, the bread and the wine, change their substance. They go beyond their original substance, their original nature. That is, when the words of institution are said and the bell rings, when the Mass is properly conducted, the bread and wine change, we could say, kind of literally into the body and blood of Christ. Of course, literally means according to the letters. So it would be better to say metaphysically. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that looks into the ultimate nature of things and into the nature of ultimate reality, if for a system that believes that there is an ultimate, divine, higher reality. And so the bread and wine appear like bread and wine, like ordinary bread and wine, and they digest the same, but in their ultimate nature, their deepest nature is the very body and blood of Christ. They have been transubstantiated. Do Catholics generally believe this today? Probably not, would be my sense. They aren't necessarily all that familiar with it and don't necessarily literally believe this. But it is still official Catholic doctrine. Some Catholic theologians mentioned in Hansen talk instead maybe about transsignification. Although to signify doesn't seem a whole lot different than to represent or to symbolize, and that's more like a later understanding, another understanding, one of the Protestant understandings we'll get to in a bit. All right. So the second one is that of Martin Luther, the originator, or at least the primary driver of the Protestant Reformation, and certainly the one who made things known to and challenged the Catholic Church in a earth-shattering kind of way. So he wasn't quite ready to go all the way with the Catholic doctrine, but he wasn't actually ready to throw it all out. So he still invoked the traditional idea of substance, And the traditional Lutheran position is consubstantiation. So con is sometimes it means against, but it's a different root for here. It's like com, and it means with, like a community, with. So what it means is that in the elements of communion, there is both the bread and wine and the physical body and blood of Christ. So the physical body and blood of Christ is present, like in transubstantiation, but the bread and wine don't change into that. They're there along with. So that's kind of a pretty metaphysical, pretty substantial understanding of the presence of Christ. So that is the second position. The third is the Reformed tradition of Calvin. And Lutheranism was the one big stream, original stream of classical Protestantism. Then Reformed was the second big stream. You also have the kind of more heterodox, more marginalized stream of Anabaptists, Mennonites, Amish. And then when King Henry has a little issue with one of his wives, we end up getting the Anglican stream. But Lutheranism and Reformed Christianity are the two big original main streams of classical Protestantism. So, Calvin taught what he called the spiritual presence of Christ. In other words, Christ is present in communion in a special way, in a way Christ is not present in other things like praying or preaching or singing some hymns. There is a special spiritual presence when we take Holy Communion. Now, of course, all these positions do say, we need to in some way receive the communion, but the Catholic position maybe goes the furthest to say, as long as you don't put up a deliberate obstacle to the spiritual nourishment of communion, you're going to be nurtured. You're going back to justification, you will grow in some way in righteousness by taking communion, even if you're kind of somewhat absent-minded, not really thinking about it much, as long as you're not saying, this is ridiculous, I don't believe in it at all, I'm just doing it to impress my girlfriend. As long as you're not pulling that kind of move, it'll do you some good. Because all three of these positions hold to what we could call an objective presence of Christ. Objective means not just in our own minds. It's out there in reality. Physical reality. I can, here I got a mouse. But at least for Christian believers, there are spiritual realities, right, that we usually don't see in any physical sense. So something objectively is present, right, in communion, right? Christ is present in communion in an extraordinary way, that an objective way that Christ is not normally present. All right, then there was another opinion in the Reformed tradition, which was promulgated by Ulrich Zwingli, and he said what probably became and probably is the predominant Protestant position today. And that's that what we're doing in communion is a memorial, Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." So we're remembering how he had the Last Supper and how he sacrificed his body, his blood for us, for all humankind, at least for those who don't believe in predestination, because those who believe in predestination would say, no, Jesus didn't die for everyone because not for those who are predestined to hell. But that's another topic for another day. But for Zwingli, then we could say that it really is all subjective as far as what kind of spiritual good we get out of communion. If we really take to heart the meaning of communion, it'll do us a lot of good. If not, not so much. So for Zwingli and most Protestants perhaps these days, the risen Christ is present everywhere and always. And as far as Christ's presence, he's not present. Jesus, the risen Christ, the exalted Christ at the right hand of the Father, who's also everywhere through the Holy Spirit, he's present in communion the same way he's present everywhere else. So just like when we're reading the Bible or singing hymns or whatever, it's kind of up to us to acknowledge the presence of Christ and to do some spirit and get some spiritual good out of whatever we're doing. But there's nothing special about communion when it comes to the presence of Jesus Christ. So those are the four kind of traditional positions since the Protestant Reformation.